as a 30-year pastor, let me say that there are lots of various seasons that you will go through as a pastor, a leader of an organization. And a lot of those seasons, one kind of bleeds into the other. But I want to talk today about what I think are three distinct seasons where I think we are especially susceptible to turning to sexual brokenness and sin in our lives, whether that's porn, fantasy, emotional or sexual affairs, you name it. In other words, turning or being susceptible to a pattern of sexual behaviors that run contrary to God's call in our lives. So let's dive into each of these three seasons. I'm going to call this first one, and forgive me, I really tried to make them all start with the same letter, but I was unable to, so don't hold it against me. But the first one is called, I'm going to call it a season of vigor. And, if you're relatively young and in the earlier part of your ministry, this season of, ministry probably coincides with you having a young or growing family. And here's what I know to be true of that period of time. Everywhere you look, you have responsibility. Your wife has needs. She needs you to be her support. She needs you to be there for her. Your kids need you for many and various things. That's just assuming your kids are in the normal range, whatever that is, and not special needs, which would be another whole set of challenges. People in the church or your ministry area, things that you're responsible for, they're looking to you to meet their needs. And the last time I checked, they might give lip service. Yeah, I know you have a young family, but really they're not dialing back their expectations and their needs just because you have a lot of personal responsibility. Now, if your wife is rearing really young kids or you're still having babies, of course, her focus is not always where it should be, which is, of course, totally focused on you, right? Go figure, right? So if you're putting this whole picture together, you are starting to feel, maybe even as you're listening to this, that the weight of the world is resting on you. There are lots of spinning plates that are all calling out for your attention, and you can very easily feel that you are getting the short end of the stick. Well, guess what? In that place, a little escape looks pretty attractive. I did a podcast on the Finding Traction side called How We Do Life, and I spoke about this three-step process: escape, isolation, and self-medication. And this kind of three-part dance is really something that we're susceptible to at this stage of our life and our ministry. Why do we want to escape? Well, obviously, we want to escape because life just feels so doggone overwhelming. The pressures are high, and it's pretty easy to be feeling, I can't handle this all, or I just need a little R&R time, or a little bit of pleasure, a little bit of distraction, a little bit of me time. Well, you can see how quickly that can go to seed in this stage of our life, and it's a very susceptible time. That would be one season of susceptibility. We'll call it a season of vigor. And of course, that usually is where we are younger, in our 20s, in our 30s, for example. Well, the next one I want to talk about is what we're just going to call a season of reevaluation, or the midlife season. And there's a reason why people often talk about this thing called a midlife crisis, because it can be very, very real for people. It was definitely real and a powerful experience that I went through when I, was close to 40. So we're going to talk about this midlife season, 35 through your 40s. But I call it in my life, again, it was around 40. I call it the perfect storm in my life, and it hit like some Midwest tornado. For me, it was burnout. This was when my dad left my mom at 40. It was midlife. It was high-speed internet, and all of them converged in a toxic, destructive way. You can go back and listen to my early episodes that I talk about that story. And when you're in the season of reevaluation, oftentimes you're looking back at the results of all of the blood, sweat, and tears, the sweat equity that you put into the ministry to this point. And you know what? Frankly, the results seem pretty underwhelming. Unless you're one of these magical people that met with success the first time and your ministry just took off, is even in those places. For me, it was like I look back and it was like everything I worked for. This is the result. All of the people who came, I've poured into, then they up and leave. There's a growing sense of disappointment, perhaps growing resentments, and kind of this accumulating sense of maybe some of the ways that you have been mistreated or treated unfairly. Even all of your youth-filled energy seems to have moved to a different address, because some of this reevaluation, angst just sucks the life out of that energy. I'm always interested in listening to podcasts that talk about seasons of life. I listened to a podcast recently on the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast. He was interviewing John Tyson, and they were talking a little bit about this, and I'm just going to quote some of that interview. You can go and listen to it. It's a fairly recent podcast from there. But listen to what the conversation between John and Carey was. This is John speaking. He says this: "I think your 40s is a really awkward decade. I remember being 42, and that was the last time. I don't know why this stuck out." This is still John speaking. "It just hit me. When I was 42, nobody was calling me a young leader anymore. It happened till I was 41, and you're not being seen, and you're not quite a sage or an elder of the village, as Bob Goff would call it. But by the time you're out of your 50s, people look at you differently, and there's a little more grace. But the 40s is a very awkward teenager phase of adult life. It is," again, John Tyson, "a kind of second adolescence." Carey Nieuwhof: "It is like a second adolescence. I think that's why you see marriages blow apart. That's why you see people have affairs, because your youth is stealing away. But your wisdom years are just getting started, theoretically." John Tyson: "Oh, mate," of course he's Australian, "oh, mate, we could do a whole podcast on midlife. I've just done a huge, I've got a course that I do at pastors' events called Ministry in Midlife, because there's almost no theology of ministry for middle-aged people, and a lot of the crises happening in ministry are being called spiritual warfare, cultural change, lack of accountability, and really it's the leader's internal life not having the tools necessary to make it into the second half of life." Interesting, right? Midlife, very important to understand. I'm reading a book right now called Life in the Transitions, or Doing Life in the Transitions, which is all about navigating those transitions. One of my podcasts that I did early on, I think the very beginning, was about the different way that, for example, porn or sexual brokenness presents itself to us as an attractive alternative at different stages of our lives. And midlife is an especially awkward time, and an especially time where I believe we are susceptible. All right, so that's season 2. You're just describing all of my ministry life. Why do you keep adding seasons, right? Okay, season 3, I really couldn't come up with a good name. I'm just going to call it a season of resting or coaching or the sunset. I don't know what it is, but this is where you have been experiencing and you have been in ministry for the long haul. Let's say you've been at it for 20 plus years, 30 years, maybe even. And after a while, it's like any job, you start feeling, you know what? This is getting old. It's getting repetitive. It feels fatiguing. I mean, just saying. Each year, for example, you've got to come to the church or your ministry area, and once again, you need to come up with something that feels fresh. You need to have a new exciting vision, a new exciting sermon series, a call to the troops or the volunteers in your ministry area to keep them energized and excited. And after a while, it just feels old. It just feels exhausting. And temptation comes where you go, you know what? Doggone it. I think I can coast for a while. Maybe I can go easy this season. And maybe even for the first time, you start thinking of that R word, retirement, right? Or at least a season where you can significantly slow down. You know, you're thinking, this is all reflective of that. It's been 8 years since I preached that 6-part sermon series. I really liked it. And if I just pull that out and kind of nuke it, maybe put it in the air fryer a bit, most of our people are new anyways, and that's going to cut way back on my prep time and energy outlay. Again, there's nothing wrong with doing old sermon series, but you get the idea. It's coasting. And so by this time, your body's starting to slow down. You don't bounce out of bed like you used to. You got more aches and pains. Maybe some health concerns are catching up to you. Because after all, how many of us really took care to live a fully healthy lifestyle while we were going full bore at ministry? The chances are, and most guys have not. And it's that your health starts catching up to you. All of that leaves us susceptible. Now, you could say, well, Vern, that's a chance where you not to need to get retired, but refired, right? I love these, pithy little statements, right? Maybe you need a new job description. Maybe you need to focus more on activities you like or give you life. I agree. All of those are possibilities. But I am talking about a deep sense of weariness that leaves you susceptible to alternate forms of passion and excitement. And let me say, the sexual detours offer exactly that. Now, some of you are thinking, no. If you're younger, you're thinking, trust me, when I get into my 50s or whatever, I'm not going to have to worry about sexual temptations. Wrong. It just presents to you in a different way. Now, some of you biblical teachers are thinking of at least one example. I'm going to give you two, of course. Some of you are already thinking, okay, this sounds a little bit like David. Yes, of course. Ding, 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 you got it. And so 2 Samuel 11, the story of David and Bathsheba, we all know the story. It says, in the spring of the year, when kings normally go out to war, David sent Joab and the Israelite army to fight the Ammonites. They destroyed the Ammonite army and laid siege to the city of Rabbah. However, David stayed behind in Jerusalem. Late one afternoon, after his midday rest, David got out of bed and was walking on the roof of the palace. As he looked out over the city, he noticed a woman of unusual beauty taking a bath. Now, why did David send Joab out to war? Well, you could say maybe he just went through a really good workshop on delegation, and that's got to be it, right? Well, I think the implication is clear here when kings normally go out to war. Spring is a season of battle. Spring is a season where you either strengthen your boundaries or expanded your boundaries. It took effort. It took energy. It involved risk. And this year, David said, you know what? I am not really up to going off to battle this spring. My body is getting tired. I've done a lot of battles. The aches and pains are there, and I can show you my scars. And I just want to sleep in my normal bed and experience my normal pleasures and just let the younger guys take care of it. After all, haven't I deserved a spring off, a spring break, right? And he's probably bored, he's out, he's restless, because he's probably also feeling a little bit guilty, I'm guessing, as well, right? So guess what happens? He is susceptible. And then, of course, we know the story that carries on from then. Let me give you one other story. You might not have put this in the same category, but I'm going to give you a second story, the story of Hezekiah. Now, Hezekiah as a king was an amazing king. He had a great run. Most of us would kill for his legacy. Listen to this legacy of Hezekiah. The Lord was with him, and Hezekiah was successful in everything he did. 2 Kings 18:7. He was a rock star. He was credited for this massive rebuilding program of Jerusalem and the country. He got his country out from under the thumb of the king of Assyria. And when he stopped paying tribute and the king of Assyria, basically came calling, with God's help, he was able to see this miraculous defeat of his enemies. I mean, he was killing it, right? And then we get near the end, the latter part of his life, and we get this story, 2 Kings 20, verse 1. About that time, Hezekiah became deathly ill, and the prophet Isaiah, son of Amos, went to visit him. He gave the king this message. This is what the Lord says, set your affairs in order, for you are going to die. You will not recover from this illness. Well, Hezekiah doesn't take this lying down. Well, he does take it lying down because he's probably lying down. But when Hezekiah hears this, it goes on and says, he turns his face to the wall and prays to the Lord. Remember, O Lord, how I have always been faithful to you and have served you single-mindedly, always doing what pleases you. Then he broke down and wept bitterly. You know the story. God goes on and honors Hezekiah's pleading and tells the prophet Isaiah, go back to Hezekiah, the leader of my people. Tell him, this is what the Lord, the God of your ancestors David says. I have heard your prayers and seen your tears. I will heal you, and 3 days from now you will get out of bed and go to the temple of the Lord. Now, it's an amazing story, and I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting more time. But look at what happens in that extra time that Hezekiah has. Soon after, the king of Babylon sent messengers basically to Hezekiah to give his best wishes and a gift, for he heard Hezekiah had been very sick. Hezekiah received the Babylonian envoy and showed them everything in his treasure houses, the silver, the gold, the spices, the aromatic oils. He also took him to see his armory and showed him everything in his royal treasuries. There was nothing in his palace or kingdom that Hezekiah did not show him. Then Isaiah the prophet went to King Hezekiah and asked him, what did these men want? Where are they from? Hezekiah replied, they came from the distant land of Babylon. Well, what did they see in your palace? Isaiah asked. They saw everything, as Hezekiah replied. I showed them everything I own, all my royal treasures. Okay, let's just stop there. If there was one word that described Hezekiah, what would it be? I think it's obvious. Pride. He's going, look at what I have amassed. Look at all of these things. And even when these envoys come from a potentially enemy country, There's no self-control. There's no humility. It's like, look at everything I have, right? He's just basically, he's in love with his own largesse in terms of what he has. There's no limited. I'm trying to come up with the right word, right? It's just like, that is not the sign of a godly, humble leader. So then Isaiah says to Hezekiah, listen to this message of the Lord. The time is coming when everything in this palace, all the treasures stored up by your ancestors until now, will be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will be left, says the Lord. Some of your own sons, your very own sons, will be taken away into exile. They will become eunuchs who will serve in the palace of Babylon's king. Then Hezekiah said to Isaiah, this message you have given me from the Lord is good. For the king was thinking, at least there will be peace and security during my lifetime. What is up with Hezekiah? Not just is he proud and self-satisfied, what is Hezekiah now focused on? He's focused on his own self-interest and security. Some of your sons will be castrated, is basically what it means to be a eunuch, and taken into exile. What leader goes, well, whatever, as long as it doesn't happen to me? He has lost all sense of care and concern for his leader, even his own family, his own self-interest and security. Now let me ask you, is that something you would like to have said of the last 5 years of your ministry? Maybe Hezekiah should have accepted God's initial plan for him rather than grasping, and I use that word deliberately, grasping for a few more years. Here's my point. As a person begins to lose steam, there comes an increased susceptibility towards those age-old brokenness patterns in our lives. Now, I am all for longevity. I pastored the same church as lead pastor for 25 years before passing it on. Obviously, I still have a role there, but longevity was really important to me. I look at churches when I've been in the community. I've seen churches that have had 4 or 5 pastors during that time, and it feels like a whole succession of stepdads. And the way those people respond to the new pastor is with that same degree of lack of confidence and mistrust because of the culture in those churches. So I'm all for longevity. Please don't get me wrong here. That was really one of the greatest legacies, I think, of Rick Warren and the Purpose-Driven Church, which was talking about that. However, there is a difference between longevity and grasping for self-interest and security. Let's go back to that same interview that I listened to between Carey Nieuwhof and John Tyson. And they end up going into this in the podcast as well. This is John Tyson. One observation I have is about retiring earlier. Look, I've got no plans to retire soon. I mean, I've got a whole lot of energy, but it's about giving away the emphasis and the influence more quickly. This is John Still. One of my best mate, Darren Whitehead, and I talk about this. He was Heibel's number 2, knows a ton of people from that world, and basically knows a lot of those guys that had spectacular failures. If they had just let it go 5 years earlier, all they would be remembered for was being once in a generation leader. There's something about grasping in those final years or scandals catching up to us. I want to let it go earlier. I want to give it away, and I want to be there to support. I don't want to bail. I want to be their support from behind and offer wise counsel, but I think we tend to leave it 5 years too long. I wonder how many extra years Hezekiah had. Carey Nieuwhof responds and says this. There was a study done a number of years ago that said one of the predictors of a moral failure is you stay in a position that is corporate 6 months longer than you should. What happens is you get bored, you get restless, the energy isn't there, you get frustrated because maybe you're not growing like you used to, and then you get distracted. I think it's Kerry Newhoff still talking. He says, I think it was Pete Scazzaro. I think it was him. Maybe it was Hybels. I can't remember. But they said there's 3 reasons why people stay too long. They haven't saved enough for retirement, so they need to keep working. They don't have a sense of identity beyond the task that many of these founding pastors have done for so long. And they don't have a ministry to go to next that feels meaningful. So you've got to start building the financial resources and the sort of third act career that you're going to have, and then figuring it out what it's like to be God's man at that age in your life. So, interesting stuff, right? That latter season of our life comes with its own susceptibilities. Getting older just doesn't let you off the hook. It just changes the types of challenges that you are susceptible to. And once again, if you think that sexual challenges are not real for older guys, boy, are you wrong. I deal with plenty of guys in their 50s and 60s, pastors included, that have had big sexual stumbles. I went to a summer, it was like a 2-week training course with the Foursquare pastor, Jack Hayford. It was back in LA. This was going back, too many years, a long time ago. But I remember Jack Hayford, who wrote a book about the sexual susceptibilities in ministry. And Jack Hayford was got to be the most, dead to rights, honest guy I'd ever met in my life. And he'd started talking about this idea. As he began to get older, he began to toy with this idea. You know what? If my wife should pass away, I wonder who I could marry. I wonder who would be a good wife for me. And that idea started as an idea worm that began to take up residence in his head. And before long, he began to focus on other women as potential sexual partners. Before long, he was in dangerous waters with his thought life. So, let me just say, at that age, sometimes it's that question, wouldn't it be nice if, can quickly lean to, why not? I need this. So, in summary, 3 levels or 3 seasons of vulnerability. That early season, that season of vigor, but that season of responsibilities. Season number 2, that midlife season, which is all about reevaluation. And finally, the last season, which can be about coasting and about us looking back and us becoming susceptible because we don't have the energy and drive that we had before, but we don't have something to move forward into. So guys, let me just say this. I am now in my early 60s, and I certainly can identify and have resembled each of these 3 seasons in my life. If you're in ministry, if you're a pastor, you're on staff somewhere, or you're in a mission capacity, a nonprofit situation, and you need to talk to somebody who gets it, can help you perhaps navigate, or a safe place to talk about what's going on in your life, maybe areas where you're feeling pulled or torn towards some of these broken patterns, or perhaps you've already started down that road and you're going, this road is going to take me over a cliff. I have got to find a way out of this, and I need to turn to somebody safe. I would love to talk to you. I would love to connect with you. My email, once again, is bandofbrothers.care@gmail.com. We'll see you next time.